sort of the human rights piece of the larger bucket or globe of humanitarian work that the Women's Refugee Commission does all around the world. And most of our work tends to focus on the human rights of migrants here in the US. We are, as Sarah mentioned, seeing today a real shift in attitude towards people who are seeking safety in our country. And I think it really goes against a long tradition of honoring and protecting human rights and the right to asylum, that this country really played a major role in establishing and leading the world in. So for me, that's particularly heartbreaking, but it also really energizes me to do something about it. My staff and I really have to give a lot of credit to my staff, who are mingled out there and who have been working themselves to the bone, especially this summer. We've been going down to the border and to detention centers. We've been doing this for over 20 years now with the Women's Refugee Commission. But since I arrived a little over 15 years ago, we've been going into detention centers in the border where we speak to women primarily, and children, and men who are locked in detention facilities or in children's shelters, most of whom have come here seeking safety. And in talking to these women, we are monitoring conditions and asking them about their journey and why they came. And their stories are so incredibly moving and empowering that you cannot leave those facilities without feeling just the need to do something about it. So really, I consider this work a privilege for all of us, that we are able to do something when we leave those facilities. You know, this started with family detention in 2006. Emily, who's here, and I went into a facility. It was the first really large detention facility that was holding children, and it was literally a jail that was holding babies. And as we walked through, a child passed a note and stuck it into Emily's hand as he ran by. The access had been risky to get into that facility, or difficult, I should say. So we're a bit nervous about reading it in front of the guys who are leading us around. We read it in the bathroom. And the note said, "Help us, ask us questions." So I think that was one of those moments that many of us have in our lives, if we're lucky, in which you're faced with a real critical decision. What are you going to do? You know, it's a time, for me it was a pivotal moment. I was a really shy person before then, believe it or not. I never spoke publicly. I had never spoken to the press. But when we left that facility, I think both Emily and I felt that we absolutely had to do something. And so we've spent really all of our time since then working on issues around family detention, which have since then grown and expanded and evolved into what at the time I could not have imagined would be a worse option, family separation. So you all know this exploded over the summer and you saw the video, but again, just to close with another story, this past summer, I spent time in the cages that you all saw at the border, talking to children who I had to choose from a list of over 500 names. I had one day to be there and interview. And so I had to just sort of look through the list and decide who I was going to pick to talk to. And there were several children on that list that were under 2 years old. So I asked to speak to them. And the first thing I was told was they went away, the guards went away, and they came back and they said, "We can't find them." I said, "What do you mean you can't find them? They're on the list. I want to talk to them. Go look for them." "Well, we called their name," they said, and they didn't answer. We were talking here about a 10-month-old, a 9-month-old, and a 2-year-old. So I tried to contain my anger and said, "Okay, well, maybe look for somebody who's taking care of a baby and bring me that person and the baby." So they eventually brought me a girl, a young woman carrying a child in her arms. It was the presumed 2-year-old. Well, it turns out, at first I thought, well, maybe she was her sister or a young mother. We had some of those cases. No, she told me, I've never seen this baby before I got here. I asked her how she ended up taking care of the baby. And she said, well, she was following me around asking me to change her diaper. This girl had been caring for this child for 3 days. No adults in the facility seemed to be aware of the fact. And when we raised a big fuss over it, it was discovered that the child was actually 4 years old, but had stopped talking and needed a diaper because she was so traumatized by the separation. They had the wrong name and the wrong age for this child. And they were unfazed. As I waited in between kids, I had to sit next to a cage full of 5-year-olds, some of whom couldn't even speak to me because they just cried. When I sat in that facility and watched the people working there, I really said to myself, all I could think of was, I am watching how crimes against humanity happen. Because each one of the people working in that facility just was focused on their one particular job. But the good side of that story is that we left that facility and the news got out, people rose up, and that practice in that facility has ended.
Well done.
Thank you. All of you. I think it's really important for